Hi everybody and welcome back to Murder at Bedtime, which is a no frills, no waffle, 15 to 20 minute true crime bedtime story. There's no ads, no sponsors, you don't even have to buy me a coffee. It's just you and me and a microphone. If you're a returning listener, you know by now that I think you are all awesome, and if it's your first time, I hope I can persuade you to stay. Now, I'd just like to say it's been a while since my last episode, but unfortunately I've had the dreaded lurgy that we've all had on the build-up to Christmas. Not felt well at all, unfortunately, so I'm now trying to get this one out. Saying that, as I record this, it is Christmas Eve, and so I hope you all have a really nice Christmas. And with that, let's crack on with tonight's episode of Murder at the Tom Tackle. Good friends Teresa and Jenny were nearly finishing their shift behind the bar at the Tom Tackle pub in Commercial Street, Southampton, at 11 p.m. They set off for a party for a mutual friend in the student area of London Road in Southampton. It wasn't far from the Tom Tackle, but because the pair weren't drinking, Vicky said she would drive them there and bring Teresa back to her car, which was in the pub's car park after the party. They stayed there about an hour and then Vicky drove the pair back to the Tom Tackle and parked up near Teresa's Ford Escort. They then chatted for about an hour, finally Teresa saying she had better be getting home. She wished her friend good night and left Vicky's car. Her friend started her engine, switched on her lights, and watched Teresa through her rear view mirror until she reached, then entered her own car. With a wave, she pulled away, and as Teresa watched her friend's lights fading and then disappearing out of the car park, she failed to see the dark figure that had been laying and waiting on the back seat of her car. She had no time to react as suddenly two hands reached around her and gripped her tightly. That was the story that the prosecution would lay out in the subsequent trial. On the morning of the 5th of December 1979, Anthony Pocock, the landlord of the Tom Tackle pub, knew he had a delivery of beer arriving. The only problem being that the Ford Escort belonging to one of his bar staff, 22-year-old Teresa Elena Di Simone, was blocking the cellar door. Approaching the car, what he saw made him recoil in horror. Laying on the back seat, half naked, was the dead body of Teresa. The police arrived almost immediately, the station being a matter of yards away. Teresa had been brutally raped and strangled. The pathologist put her death at being between 1 and 2 a.m. It was suspected straight away that the killer was either waiting in the shadows or was already in the back of the car waiting for Teresa to return. Now, I personally find that a very disturbing thought. A gold crucifix and chain that she always wore was missing, and it was thought at first that this may have been the ligature used to strangle Teresa. Semen swabs taken at the scene showed the killer had a blood type of A or AB, Detective Inspector John Porter, leading the investigation, stated. Her handbag and diary were found nearby, but 4 bracelets, 3 rings, 2 necklaces and her car keys, along with the crucifix and chain, were never found. Even though the jewellery had been stolen, D.I. Porter later spoke of how he believed this was a red herring, and he believed Teresa was the victim of a planned, brutal rape and murder by a merciless killer. Teresa Elena Di Simone was born on the 24th of June 1957 to Mother Maria and Father Mario. Now, it's not reported what happened to her father, but her mother remarried to Michael Sedotti, who Teresa had a good relationship with. The family lived together in the Shirley area of Southampton. She was described as happy but shy, with a sensible head and very clever, leaving school with 9 O-levels and 2 A-levels. She had no problem in securing a good job as a clerk for the Southern Gas Board. She passed her driving test and bought a car, so took on a couple of shifts at the Tom Tackle pub to help with the payments on her car and to widen her circle of friends. The investigation became one of the largest in Southampton's history. In the year that followed, the police interviewed 30,000 people and tracked down 500 people that had been in the area on the night of the murder. Only 2 days after Teresa was found, a man from Tow Law in County Durham called Sean Hodgson was arrested for the theft of a vehicle. He had arrived in Southampton 2 days before Teresa's murder. While being interviewed about that offence, Hodgson brought up the name of an acquaintance he claimed had told him had something to do with Teresa's death. The police detained this man, but he did not have the matching blood group and was released. On the 9th of December, Hodgson was interviewed again. This time he was asked questions about the murder. He provided an alibi which could not be corroborated, and a blood sample showed him to have Group A blood. They looked into his past and found he had numerous convictions, mostly for dishonesty and deception and car theft, plus 1 conviction for unlawful sexual intercourse, but none for violence. All I can assume for the unlawful sexual intercourse without violence is it was underage, but I'm only guessing. He also had a history of self-harming and was sent to a clinic where he tried to overdose with pills. While he was there, psychologists found him to have a severe personality disorder and labelled him a compulsive liar. On the 14th of July 1980, Hodgson was rearrested while on bail in London for the earlier thefts and more, and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. On the 11th of December 1980, he asked to see Father Frank Moran, the chaplain of the prison, where Hodgson told Father Frank he had been suffering from nightmares of a woman he had killed in Southampton, and she kept coming back to him. It was, he said, nearing the anniversary of her death. Father Frank informed the prison warden, and Hodgson was asked to write it all down, which he did, even adding, "I wish now that it was me that was dead, and not the girl at the Tom Tackle." The police interviewed him again, and he was taken to the crime scene, where he walked around the pub's car park, pointing out where he had disposed of Teresa's belongings, which of course were no longer there. He also, the police said, knew details of the murder that they had not made public. Hodgson's trial was heard at Winchester Crown Court in late January and early February in 1982. His defence counsel, Robin Gray QC, stated Hodgson would not be taking the stand in his own defence, as he was a pathological liar, but he added he did not kill Teresa. But as he had confessed to over 200 crimes he hadn't committed, and including murders that hadn't even happened, taking the stand would not be to his advantage. The prosecution painted a picture of Hodgson getting drunk and looking for somewhere to sleep. He tried Teresa's car and, finding it unlocked, climbed into the back seat and fell asleep, and then brutally attacked her when she returned to her car and Jenny had driven off. The confessions, the details of the crime he supposedly knew even though they hadn't been released, and his refusal to take the stand did him no favours, and Hodgson was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. He was denied parole on multiple occasions due to his refusal to admit his guilt. 26 years went by and he contacted London solicitors Julian Young & Co., who he had read specialised in bringing appeals against convictions. They took the case and assigned their lead solicitor, Rag Chand, to follow it up. He took 4 months trying to track down the forensic evidence from the original murder scene. Even after being constantly told that the evidence had been destroyed in 1998, Chand carried on, and eventually a tip-off led him to an unused and unprotected evidence archive on an industrial estate in the Midlands. And it was here he found the forensic evidence he needed. In February 2009, after 27 years in prison, Sean Hodgson walked out of court a free man after it was found DNA from the semen swab taken from the crime scene did not match his DNA. Before his release, he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and depression, but he was released with no aftercare for his condition and just £250,000 compensation. Within a year, he was back in court over allegations of the rape and sexual assault of a woman with learning difficulties. He was sentenced to a community order that included intense psychiatric care. In 2012, just 3 years after his release from prison, Sean Hodgson died of emphysema. It also left a burning question: who did kill Teresa? After Sean was released, the Criminal Case Review Committee set up Operation Iceberg to review 240 other convictions of rape and murder cases using pre-1990 DNA testing. While doing a basic sweep against Teresa's case, familiaral DNA was flagged up on the sister of a man called David Lace, who had committed suicide in December 1988. In August 2009, his body was exhumed from Kingston Cemetery in Portsmouth. His DNA was tested and was found to be a 1 billion to 1 match for the killer of Teresa Di Simone. Lace was a very troubled child. He was 17 years old at the time of Teresa's murder, with a string of thefts to his name and an aggressive temper. In 1983, he confessed to Teresa's murder while being in police custody for theft. He begged the police to put him in prison because he couldn't live with the guilt. But of course, Sean Hodgson had already been jailed for life by this time, so his confession was ignored. According to Lace's confession, on the 4th of December 1979, he stole a rucksack from the care home he was staying in Portsmouth and travelled to Southampton, where he came across Teresa getting into her car. He knocked on the window and asked the time. Then, before forcing himself inside and brutally raping Teresa before strangling her with her seatbelt. He hid for 10 minutes in the shadows before making his way back to the train station and back to Portsmouth. So not only did they originally get the wrong man, but they were wrong about the method of the killing. Can you imagine, though, the range of emotions Teresa's mum and stepdad went through? Firstly, their daughter is murdered at only 22 years old. Then the murderer is found and convicted. Then 27 years later they are told it's the wrong man. And then finally they are told they now have the right man, but he's dead. Wow, that is a lot to deal with. Anyway, that is it for another episode. I hope you found it of some interest. If you did, if you could kindly rate and review, I would be extremely chuffed. So thank you for listening and hope to see you next time. Not any waffle this time because unfortunately I just haven't felt up to it. But hopefully I'm on the way back now, feeling better, and next year will be a lot more waffle for you to either listen to or turn off. But I hope you all have a very lovely, Merry Christmas and a fantastic New Year. I know it's probably going to be a tough one for all of us, but I'm sure we'll see it through. And thanks for listening. See you soon.